To go along with the Azande film that you guys are watching this week, I wanted to provide a look at who the Azande were before this video. The video you're watching is a little bit more modern, but not altogether contemporary look of the Azande. And I wanted to show you what they were doing back in the 1920s when the anthropologist E. Evans Pritchard was studying them. And also go into a little bit more of the concepts that they talk about in the film. So, like I said before, this information comes from a book that E. Evans Pritchard wrote over the Azande concerning his fieldwork that he did in the 1920s with the Azande of Sudan. So, right there in Africa, right underneath Egypt. And what he writes about with the Azande is that they were horticulturalists but also foragers. They don't necessarily need to be mutually exclusive and rarely are. So, with the horticulturalists, they were growing corn and manioc, bananas, legumes, sweet potatoes in their gardens. They were also raising chickens. They were fishing, they were foraging outside of their gardens. I was reading that termites were a delicacy, and they usually were settling next to banks of rivers and streams. You can think of the advantages of that, including drinking water, water for your crops. You could travel, you can fish, like I was saying they do before. The Zonde homeland, and in this case, Zonde is the adjective, Azande is the noun, so I promise I didn't misspell that. In the Zonde homeland, the area where they're living, each area is divided up into kingdoms. And so there's a royal dynasty in each kingdom. We'll talk more about the kings here in a minute. You kind of see an example of that in the film with the chief. The subjects, though, they had a lot of autonomy, so they had a lot of independence from that king regardless, but they did have to pay tribute, meaning kind of like a tax to the leader, the king, and they had to obey any summons if the king needed them to come to them. So here was a picture that E. Evans Pritchard provided in his book of a king when he was there. And then he also provided this drawing of a past king. They had a scattered residential pattern. You have to think of the benefits of that as a horticulturalist. You don't want too many people continually putting their gardens in the same area, because if you remember reading last week, horticulturalists will have a garden, but only for a few years, and then they'll let that land go fallow as they go plant a garden somewhere else so they can get nutrients in a different place. So you don't want too many people doing that, or you're going to run out of land in the same area. However, that scattered residential pattern began to stop when the colonial government decided to do a relocation scheme in the 1920s. They This is with the French, the Belgians, Anglo-Egyptian governments who are out throughout the area in Africa doing these things. And what they were saying is that you need to move away from these rivers. They're telling the Azande they need to move away from the rivers because of the illnesses like sleeping sickness that the mosquitoes were giving them. But at least E. Evans Pritchard argues that really what this was doing was trying to get these scattered populations in one area because that's usually easier to control. Think about how the American government treated the Native Americans. We took their scattered populations and put them on reservations, or at least put them in one area because it's easier to control what they're doing. And so the government had done this as well with the Azande, and they conveniently relocated them next to government roads and then introduced cotton as a cash crop. So then they would be growing cotton, and then the government vehicles could go down these roads and get the cotton they had grown and pay them in cash. But what you see happen with the Azande homesteads is that they become pretty reliant on the cash they get from growing the cotton. And over time, what we've seen with indigenous populations around the world is they get dependent on these cash crops and lose the ability to provide for themselves like they had been in the past with their crops or the foraging. And therefore, now they have to use that cash to buy things from the same people that they are selling that cotton to. Okay, let's talk about their social structure. So the basic social unit is the family homestead. Usually, the nuclear family, a single family, although men can be married to multiple women. We call that polygyny, meaning multiple wives. And like I was talking before, they do recognize a king. So if we talk about the hierarchy of the Azande culture, they do have the king, but The king isn't all powerful like we might think of a king in our culture or in other cultures. And they're patrilineal. And what that means is they trace descent through the male line, which typically means that males are very important in this culture. I should say, too, with their homestead, their neighbors typically are people they're related to. So even though they've got this single family living in this area, they're pretty close to their family members. And going back to the patrilineal concept, too, you're going to see that value of men, or at least men being in charge, reflected in who and who can't use the oracles. All right, let's talk about their social or superstructure, excuse me. So, at least traditionally, they believe in an all-powerful god, Mboli, and watch the video, notice how things have changed with that as well. They revere their ancestors. You usually see that in cultures who are unilineal, meaning they trace descent through one side. So, like I told you, they're patrilineal. So they revere their ancestors, the ancestral spirits, I should say. They have a strong belief in witchcraft, and that's what makes the Azande so famous in the anthropology community. And oracles are also a very important part of their culture. And I'm going to talk about those last two more in depth, and you're going to see a lot of that in the film as well. So let's talk about witchcraft. Witchcraft is used to explain unfortunate events. And what do I mean by that? There's this section in his book where he goes on to list all the unfortunate events that would be blamed on witchcraft. And I'm talking about if a wife is kind of sulky and doesn't want to be with her husband, or if someone goes fishing and doesn't catch any fish, or just all these things, that bad things that happen in your day-to-day life is probably due to witchcraft, at least according to them. So it's intertwined with everyday happenings. One of the most famous examples that E. Evans Pritchard gives is the granary example. So what happens in the Azande culture is that they have that corn, and they keep corns in granaries. So if you look in this picture right here, here's a granary, and it's standing on 4 wooden posts. Well, as you can imagine, it gets pretty hot in the Sudan, so people will sit under the shade of that granary. Well, every once in a while, that granary will fall and kill someone. And the Azande know it's because the termites have been eating at the posts. But they want to know, well, why did that happen to that person at that time and in that place? And so what their explanation would be witchcraft. And some of you out there might be thinking that's kind of silly, but what we would attribute to coincidence or bad luck, the Azande would prefer to blame witchcraft. Because you have to really think, if you had to explain luck or coincidence to someone, what is that? It's a very abstract concept. Oh, bad luck. And for them, they really need to have that answer like, well, there is no coincidence. Why was it that person in that time in that place? And the only answer could be that someone had it out for you. A witch had it out for you. And so they knew you were going to be under there, and then witchcraft got you. Another interesting thing they believe in are oracles. So oracles are used to look into the future, see what's going to happen, or see what's going on underneath your nose right now. So you could do it to see if you should do something, use an oracle to see if you should do something, check to see if your wife is being unfaithful, see if someone is doing witchcraft on you. You might see these things in the video. So there's a hierarchy of oracles, at least according to E. Evans Pritchard, because in the film you're going to see it's a little different. So what I mean by hierarchy is which one you would go to first. And so the rubbing board you're going to go to first, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit why. Then you'd go to termite, and then you'd go to poison. So if you plan to consult more than one, an Azande person would consult the lesser one before the greater. And I'm going to talk about this in just a minute, but just remember this is the hierarchy. This doesn't mean that the rubbing board's the most important. It means that it's the first one you would go to. And here's why. So here's the rubbing board oracle. It's the most used oracle, at least in E. Evans Pritchard time there, because anybody could have one of these rubbing boards at their house. It's only used for minor and preliminary questions because you don't really put complete faith in its statements, or at least that's what E. Evans Pritchard said. So, what is a rubbing board oracle? Well, what you do is you get answers by sliding a lid back and forth. You're going to get a little better look at this in the film, but you've got one part that moves across the bottom part, and you're going to squeeze plant juices on the table face, place the lid on top, and move it back and forth. And then you get answers whether or not it sticks. If it slides smoothly, it's a negative answer. If it sticks, it's affirmative. But like I said, they don't put complete faith in its statements. It's widely available, at least it was in the 1920s, and don't trust it as much. Okay, now you have the termite oracle. So the termite oracle can be used by everyone because termite mounds are abundant and out there for anyone to use. So what you're going to do is you're going to place 2 sticks in a termite mound, and you're going to assign each stick an answer. So maybe you're an old man and you want to see if you're going to die this year. So you say, okay, this stick is my I will die this year stick. This is my I won't die this year stick. Put it in the termite mound. You pose your questions to the termites. You're letting the termites tell you what's going to go on. It's a little bit more lengthy because you have to wait to get your answer until the next day. You have to wait to see if what the termites do, and you have to give them time to eat the stick they want to eat. And so the stick that gets eaten is your answer. But they believe that if both branches are eaten, it's an invalid answer. They say that the termites refuse the answer and you need to move on to another mound. All right. So last but not least is going to be the poison oracle. The poison oracle is used just by men, which I found it curious when reading the book because a lot of people go to the poison oracle when you want to determine if your wife is being unfaithful. And it seems kind of interesting that the women can't use it. So used just by men, and you're going to rely completely on its decisions. And you're going to see this in the film. And the reason why they do it is because it's kind of a time-consuming, if you want, an expensive thing to do. Because you not only have to provide chickens, you have to provide the poison called Bengay, and you have to find someone that can appropriately do this as well. So no important venture is done without it. Once again, in his book, he had all these things of what you would do. So if you're going to get married, if you want to make sure that you should do something for a king, you need to check this. If you're going to go work for the colonial government, you need to check it. They really rely on its decisions, like it says. Okay, this is when it gets different from the film. Your answer is based on whether a chicken fed poison dies. In the film, they're just going to feed one chicken poison and see if it dies. And I know you're thinking you're feeding a chicken poison, so it's probably going to die, right? It doesn't always happen. They feed these chickens Bengay. It's a certain kind of poison, not the Bengay you might know of in our culture. And the chickens don't always die. So in the film, you see them just feed one chicken poison and base the answers on that. Well, when E. Evans Pritchard did it, it almost had a more, I will say it, scientific way of working. This is what they do. They would take 2 chickens. And here's your 2 chickens. The first chicken, they would say, like for an example, we'll say, is my wife cheating on me? If the chicken dies, yes. If the chicken lives, no. Okay. Well, what's going to happen to this chicken? Oh, he dies. That means your wife's cheating on you. But they want to make sure that the oracle is actually working. So they're going to take that second chicken and they're going to assign those answers to the opposite response. So now they're going to say, if the chicken dies, she isn't cheating on me. And if the chicken lives, she is cheating on me. So we're going to let this chicken live. So that means they double check that the oracle is listening to them and not just assume that the poison is going to kill both of them. I hope that makes sense. Do not worry. I'm not going to extensively test that. I just think this is kind of an interesting way because we think, oh, of course it's going to die from poison, but they're actually checking to make sure that whomever that they're talking to, the oracle, is actually listening and noting that it needs to do opposite things. Okay. And there's a meme for you. Why did you fail your test about the Azande? I hope you don't in a few weeks, but If you do, you can always blame witchcraft. Okay, so that's your history and a little bit more look into the oracles and witchcraft. I hope you guys enjoy the film this week.